All right, welcome to another episode of P5Live Sessions. What are we going to get into today? I am going to attempt to mess around with some inspiration from nature. What we're seeing here are like almost raindrop-like circles. But this past weekend saw some quite nice water wave ripples across lakes from different altitudes at the shore from way up high. And so I think it'll be interesting to mess around with, some kind of two-dimensional array. Maybe it gets three-dimensional to try and see what kind of wave, water-like surface things we could create. So I'm just going to start out by making a collection for this whole group of points. I'm going to call these things chords. And maybe this should be a little bit bigger. And I should get something drawing on the page while I talk. Otherwise it's kind of boring if nothing is happening. So I'm going to make first just like a background. And let's make a little loop. I is less than 50, I plus plus. Maybe I'll do a random seed of 1, so I don't have to worry about where these things are, and I'll say these are some ellipses. Ellipse at random width. This is random width minus width divided by 2. Random height minus height divided by 2. I can probably recycle some of this for what I want to do above. There we go. Kind of starry night. But now I want to have those points kind of move in some kind of motion. So I'll just say plus frame count modulo width. And they all move together. So maybe it is, I wonder if I wrap this whole thing. Does that work? Yep. And then this needs to be at the very end of that whole thing. So that whole thing, there we go. So this is just like, let me do actually some like random 1 to 25, so it can be different sizes. And maybe I multiply this. This is not even what I wanted to do, but it's kind of fun just making something happen. There we go. So something is in motion. There is no transparency or no like fading because we're in WebGL mode. So I could turn that off and leave it streak, but we'll get that going. And now with the chords, I want to produce these positions, I think in the setup, because I don't necessarily want to have random seed on. So I'm going to maybe also determine how big is the grid of these things. And I'll say grid equals, let's start out with like a 40 by 40 and see what that's like. So I'm going to say, maybe while I type this out, I turn off live coding so I can get some code down and set up a for loop. Let I equal 0. I is less than grid. For let j equal 0. J is less than grid. J plus plus. Okay, so I can make a 2D array of coordinates out there. And I need to map these positions. Let's see, map x goes from I0 to grid minus 1. Let's go from minus width divided by 2 to width divided by 2. We'll start out with them just covering the whole board. And I'm going to copy paste that line and recycle it for j. Make this based on the height. And then maybe to give them some different texture, I'll make up a z. Let z equal a random from like minus 50 to 50 is probably too much, but then we'll see something. And then I'm going to say chords.push, create a vector of x, y, z. Okay, I should have all those points now. Once I compile it, I'm going to temporarily, I'm just going to recycle this. This is now going to be chords.length. I'll let c equal each chord turn off this nice thing and replace it with C dot. Oh no, let's translate to that spot actually. Should do a push, pop, translate C.X, C.Y, C.Z, and then draw these things in that one spot. So random seed is still on. I will give them, nevertheless, size 10. Let's see what happens. All right. So there are all those points with some random Z, which might be interesting if I'm going to turn off random seed for a minute. And rotate a bit. Rotate X. Radians 45. Yeah, so I can see those random Z's that I give everything. Could make it more extreme, but 50 is enough. Just to be able to see, maybe it's nice to orbit control so I can occasionally spin it around. Orbit control 5. Whoops. 5. That way I can spin this thing around and get an idea of what that meant, and looks like the fact these things are kind of lifted up is interesting. What will also be interesting is to connect these things in different ways. So that is as a bunch of ellipses. I need to try it out once as a begin shape, end shape, and draw vertices instead. Vertex C.X. I wonder if I could just plug C into it. Nope. C.X, C.Y, C.Z. Whoa, and we need no fill. No fill, and a stroke that's white. There we go. Yeah, so that's not very efficient, that it's like drawing zigzag, zigzag, getting from one end and then jumping back to the other. But then it's always nice that I can draw with points, for example, and now it looks just like the other one. Or I could draw with lines, which is similar but different. Kind of cool how those things stick up. Or ones that I never play with is triangles or triangle quads. I'll have to explore these because maybe there will be some interesting ways to use this. Triangle, what's it called? Triangle strip is one. Similar but different. I think I'll quickly look at the reference. Begin shape and check out those options again. There's triangle strip, triangle fan. Fan looks very similar to the other. There is quads. I'm probably not feeding enough points into this thing to play really with triangles. Quads. Nope. Quad strip. Nope. Okay, whatever. I'm going to play with lines for a while because that was kind of nice with these, the way these lines popped up. And maybe I already changed the color of this stuff to be in the blue domain. But even more in the aqua domain, because it was quite a bright blue. And then it would be nice to have those things kind of doing some kind of a rolling movement. So at the moment, these things are all based on this random amount. If I gave 0, we would have really flat lines going across. Also kind of interesting. We get some lighting in 3D domain. Let's see what lights is like. Doesn't do much. Maybe because they're so thin. But let me try and get some wave happening to these things. So I'm going to say, for example, the Z plus a sine wave. Slowed down times 50, and then everything kind of goes up and down at once. A little fast. I'm going to slow it down a bit. But then throw I into it. I times 5 plus. And now we're already starting to get into wavy territory, or 0.1. 0.2. Ooh, 0.3. Now we're definitely in wave domain. 0.4. 0.5. Yeah, I can play with what those ripples are like. These are way stronger waves than I experienced. So this doesn't need to be 50, although it is interesting to have it be on the more extreme side so you can see what's happening. But this is a bit more like it. That's just kind of a subtle ripple. Maybe while figuring out those numbers, I'll make it a little bit more extreme. And then also have to figure out, this is just going in like one domain, maybe multiple domains, or playing with what exactly that number is to modulate it to get different patterns happening on the water. Because like maybe a sailboat went by and it made ripples coming out from it. But I think before I get into that, I'm going to play with some different numbers here and just see what happens when we play with different sine waves out there. So 9, we can get really small ripples. Up to 1, can start making big jumps. Maybe I make these things a bit thicker. Stroke weight 2 or 3. And then it's maybe a bit more visible on the screen, on the stream. And where and how could I get these things to appear in different domains? So I'm actually going to cut this from here, from the Z, and put it on the Y and see what happens. All right, then those things connect every once in a while. Take it away, add it to the X. Ooh, then we get these kind of, looks like we could be looking at weather patterns, wind, but maybe it's interesting to have something like that on both the X and the Z and get some kind of, but they should definitely be different ratios to each other so they're unique. So they could go at different speeds, be different amounts. 0.8, 0.9, rather 7, 6, 5. 6 is quite interesting. 5, 4, 3. Yeah, and this is now like a 40 by 40 grid, which is barely anything. And you would really want way, 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 way more to see something fancy happening. I'm going to quickly change this to points. See what it's like when it leaves a trace, although it'll just kind of fill up that space. And interesting. That's kind of cool. Shows us exactly what those sine waves were doing against each other. I'm going to give this thing a name since we've been untitled. Rename P5Live Session dash, I'll call this Lake Waves is what we're based on, and take a screenshot of that just to save a couple of these things. Let's add a background again, get another perspective, take away the background. Watch those things grow. They make some interesting links. I could get like kind of a at the shore side view. Yeah, we can really see all those circles being created at slightly different pitches. If I drag while the background is off, we get traced out points. Yeah, so there needs to be more irregularity to this. Although that's quite cool, seeing this blend from circle down to nothing, back up to circle. But definitely have to change the speed of this stuff because right now they're locked into the exact same amount of frame count. So changing this will do quite a bit. It could be a 2-to-1 ratio, would be interesting. I guess that would leave infinity symbols. Yep. In a vertical way. Interesting. Or it could be the opposite, 0, 1, 5. Whoops. And then this should leave horizontal infinity like symbols traced out. Yeah, not what I was going for at the beginning, but interesting nonetheless what that looks like. Let me give it a bit of perspective. And then, of course, interesting when these things don't match up very easily, when there's some other kind of random amount that just don't line up very well. What does it look like? It takes away some of the irregularity of it. Bring back the background, change to lines, and try tracing this. Interesting. I like it for like a split second before it gets too much shape on there. Whoops. Tweak the perspective a bit. Refresh. Maybe first I need to find the perspective I want and then disable the background. Let's do it once. Fairly straight on. Maybe it's nice to also modulate the color a bit. So if this thing leaves a trace, it's not so static. So let's mess with maybe the amount of green that's in there. It could be interesting if you add some red. Nope, that makes it just go into like grayscale territory. Or desaturation, it should be here. Frame count modulo 200, for example. We'll get brighter, 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 but then it like snaps back. So I'm going to do an ABS of that slowed down times 200. Going too fast, pulse slower. And maybe a similar thing for this amount of blue. That this should be times 255 and maybe just like the cosine of it. Ooh, and then we get into green waters. So maybe this is always in a certain amount, like 150 plus, and then just add and take away 100 from it. Or add 100 rather. And if I disable that rotation, disable the background, get some interesting shaded waves in there. Almost look like fish, some of them. I'm going to temporarily make a way bigger grid and erase everything. Just to see what this thing looks like at a different scale. But then everything isn't really wiggling around enough. That wiggle amount should be based on the grid. So that should be something like offset, and offset should equal the width divided by grid. So we know how big this thing should be allowed to move back and forth. Instead of 20, it should be offset, offset. And now these things are moving way too fast. Maybe it should be half of the offset. Unless I make this grid way bigger. Nope, I think it's like half the offset, maybe divided by 2. Yep, so I'm going to make this smaller again and just see what that looks like traced out. Add a background and get some perspective. Yeah, it's a different kind of wave than I was imagining in my head, but it's something totally different than I imagined in my head. So got to keep playing with this and see where else it can go. At 40, which I was playing with before. Interesting, every time I recompile, do a hard compile, I lose my rotation. So that's okay, maybe I have to figure out where exactly the base point should be. And I think it'd be nice if these things actually could move way further in a direction. Maybe they shouldn't be doing a sine movement on the X, but rather a modulo to get those things just like moving off the screen. It's also a question, should these things be going way further off screen? Maybe it should be width minus width by positive width, so I can totally fill up the peripheral vision, so it's going way off to the side there, but we don't see a starting or end point. and still have a lot to explore with what exactly those wave ratios should be. But I think it would be interesting to let this thing move off to the side once. So I'm going to take away our X movement for a moment. And then we just have the Z. And I'm going to, what am I going to do? Try and get it to move somehow at different speeds off to the side. So maybe it's about changing what exactly the CX is. Maybe I do like a C dot X minus equals, and then it needs to be some value. Maybe it's like sine of I have no idea, times 5. What does that even mean? There we go. So those things are like running away. I have it on lines. I'm going to put it on points so I can see where these things are going. So they're all kind of like running away, but they're going, interesting. They're like plus and minusing because it's a sine wave. So if I slowed that thing down, 0.01, in a way, this might create some of that kind of ripple going back and forth. Where are these things going? They're going way down there. Way down there, kind of left the center behind. Interesting. Not quite what I want. I don't want them to go so far. Yeah, what does this mean? If I had times 1, they won't go so far. I guess it's just that that number gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And so, of course, some of them are going like faster and faster and faster away from others, which may or may not be what I want. Maybe I just want it to be a frame count, so they're all moving technically together. So now, there we go. They're like wiggling back and forth. Slow that down. There we go. Whoa, they're all going off to the left. And then they're all going off to the right. Have like a weird wave dance. And then have to get, have to introduce, I mean, this is similar to what there was before. I think I didn't paste it. There we go. This is somehow similar to what was there. Only now it's like a minus equals. So the coordinate itself is changing constantly. And I'm going to throw I into this and say just like I plus. There we go. So they have like their own unique starting point, and maybe it's I times a fraction of I. I don't know. Start it from scratch and see what happens. There they go. They just went whoosh. And the higher this number is, the less connected they all seem to each other. So it's interesting to... They're also going really fast. What if this was really slowed down? Oh, it doesn't make a difference. There we go. That's that kind of dissipation. And then they're not going very far and will come back eventually there. Whoosh. That could be a kind of interesting movement. It might look wave-like. What does this look like? With lines. I mean, it's way too regular looking. It also looks like it's pausing. That could be just from it complaining about drawing lines. What if I don't do any of that? Nope, these points are not so cool. But the waves look nice. And what if I duplicate this, turn it off, and do curve vertexes instead? Curve vertex. Oh, it hates that. Wow. Wrong click. Damn. Can't handle that. If I just do a 20 grid, wow, it freaks out. Interesting. Why is that so hard for it to calculate? Maybe because it's just so many points. If I disable this change. Interesting. And I wonder if I could avoid these long straight lines by just saying only draw, No, I kind of need this value to like, damn, the Y would need to kind of zigzag back and forth. It should like slowly evolve. It should work its way down and back. Maybe I need to do something like, this should really be sine of J, probably times something, times 0.1, times height divided by 2. That didn't do it. Why didn't that do it? I thought that would kind of send them back and forth. I won't make a difference. Nope, J is the right one. Okay, but anyways, it doesn't handle curve vertex very well. A normal vertex, no problem. Yeah, but one question is getting those bars to match nicely back to each other. I'm gonna temporarily try to find out where these things are. Maybe because this needs to be, whoops. Let's put it back on the vertex. Okay, hard to tell. Let's go back up to a higher number. And bring back the lines. Nope, this didn't help at all. With points, it's not bad. It probably has an interesting ripple. Should let it trace itself out a bit and see what those things are doing. It doesn't make sense connected as a bunch of lines. Something has to happen on the Y. It's way too stable there. Bring this back. Let's go back to lines, and I think I'm going to get rid of this attempt here. I don't think that made it any better. Let's turn that off, but leave it. I think something has to happen to the Y here. It's too stable. So maybe it's worth also doing something to the Y, and in a totally different, not totally different, but maybe a connected but different ratio. Can tell it's calculating too many points. It's probably not so happy with this many values to hold on to. And what does this look like without a background? Kind of looks like a bunch of Pringles, colorful blue food dyed Pringles falling all over the place. Like blue chips. Bring back the background. Yeah, maybe it doesn't have to go so far off to the side. Maybe times 0.7. So it's just kind of off screen, but then we still can see a bunch of them. Yeah, but that's making an interesting wavy movement. If I zoom a ways out from it. So it's going like swinging back and forth. I was still curious to have these things constantly move off to a direction, to be like a wave that really goes off somewhere. So let's mess with that and leave the x, turn that one off and say c dot x equals, and if I just did a the question is, what is it? Frame count modulo width. Kind of had it before, actually. It was like this whole thing without the random. So it was like that minus width divided by 2, and right now they're all together. And this should be there, and I need to get I into this I times 5 plus. There we go. So now everything is kind of running off to the right. I'll zoom in a little bit. Ooh. And we get these interesting lines where they're like connecting from where they expired to the next level and say ×3 to make them go faster. And I kind of actually wanted it to go the opposite way. So I'm going to say nope. I'm going to say times a -2, nope. Oh yeah, and then just plus. There we go. Because the wind brought everything from the right to the left. And I want to skip any of these vertices that have too big a distance between them. So if I say, maybe I start counting at 1 and have like CP for the previous one be a -1. And then double check the distance. If the I always forget how to do this, but I think I can say CP.dist C is less than like 50. Is that doing it? 150? I don't know if that helped. It didn't help it, but I'm going to try doing the same thing. Dist C.x, C.y, CP.x, CP.y. Is that the exact same thing? I'm pretty sure. If the dist is less than 50. 1, 10, 20, 30, 50, 500. Okay, I guess there's just a problem that... yeah, I think it was the exact same formula I had before. Paste. Then I guess if it's not the case, else... Whoops. Else, maybe just draw a second vertice to where it is. Well, you're always going to have that, I guess, when you have these lines. Would it make a difference if I just drew it exactly where it's supposed to be? Or where the previous one was? Nope, that doesn't do it. In points, we don't have this problem. There we can see that leaving a trace over time. Yeah, one of the problems dealing with lines or other forms is how all this stuff zigzags, if it's a problem. Let me go back to points where it's not a problem. Get rid of these if statements. Although, maybe it's interesting to use my mouse in an interactive way. Let me make the... What if I use... what if I say dist of c.x, c.y to mouse x, mouse y? Doesn't like it. Dist if dist. Why doesn't it like that? Fine, no, take it away. Check out the console real quick. What happens when this is on? What didn't it like? Make that smaller. Request animation hand. Too many errors. Strange. Okay. No mouse or X. C.x, C.y. Ah, I know what's happening. There is Maybe it was drawing nothing and freaking out. If I draw nothing, I think it's not having a problem. It's just, there we go. Because also the mouse X and Y are offset because we're in WebGL mode. So I should subtract minus height divided by 2. There we go. Yeah, so I can have kind of like a spotlight on the water. Could be fancy and interesting. And then I could like selectively draw areas of those waves moving. It might be nice to make those waves way thinner. If I'm going to do this, that doesn't look much thinner. 0.1. That's too thin. 0.5. That's too thin. Interesting. I only see it. Oh, there we go. 0.1. We're at 1. Yeah, I don't know how easy this will be to see on the stream, but kind of interesting to be able to selectively have some of those areas cast. And maybe 500 is too big of a spotlight. We'll change it down to 200 and re-render this. Why does it keep making this? Strange. The stroke weight gets way bigger again, even though it's supposed to be 1. Whatever. It doesn't care. Strange. I go 2, I go 1, 2, 1, 0, 1, and then it's okay with it. Super strange. Is that a bug? I don't know. 1, there we go. Yes, now this is like wave painting. And interesting because the color is modulating over time, so it's like you end up painting a little bit of green, painting a little bit of blue. And I guess if you wait long enough, it'll go back to being a shade of blue and kind of cover up that green. I think you probably don't see any of this. I bet it's probably too fine. So fine, we'll let the pixels be thicker. Doesn't make sense. There's something really weird going on with the stroke thickness. Have to figure out what's going on. And of course, if I rotate the canvas, then we get something totally different. Let me turn off this distance for a minute, just so I can see everything leaving its mark. Let's have a background. And interesting, now the stroke weight looks normal. Maybe it makes a big difference if the background is on or off. Probably. Can make the waves more intense. So many spots just to change a few numbers and see what effect that has. Ooh, there's like a single rolling wave. That could be interesting to trace out once. Giant cable salad. Yeah, it super shows off the sine wave of the coloring. Let's go back and undo what we had changed there. That was also interesting. Static chaos mode. Interesting how some of these numbers become such rows and like perfect separations of of all these kind of particles, I guess. Let's let that trace out a bit. And then it might be nice to go back to taking away this perspective and just going to straight overhead. What does this thing look like from way up high? and zoomed out a bit. And what does it look like at staring straight onto it? It's also interesting. Definitely something to, I'm going to zoom into it real quick so that these trails are taller. Starts to look very data visualizy. This is about this Y. It's probably about, if I start the whole thing over, I'm guessing it's about, whoa, how high these things can get. Interesting. This is now the solar system change. I'm going to undo those two numbers, go back to this rotate. I'm going to clone this because that was quite interesting. I'm going to, yeah, I'll rename it later. Reactivate that 9D rotation and this giant change where it becomes kind of solar-like, and maybe make these points bigger. Times 40, but then, no, that doesn't make it necessarily taller. Something should be slowed down. Nope, I don't think it's that one. Could be this one, times 0.1. Nope. Yeah, it became quite a solar system-y like wave movement. Okay, was interesting to try out. But I think I'll go back to this and clone it again and keep working from that. It's just interesting to see that difference. What would be nice is to get maybe more like a sharp edge to these things. So I'm going to make them thicker and take away some of the sine movement that's just really making these things so soft. So like this Y movement, if I disable this one, actually I'm going to turn background back on so we can see the change. That's with the Y, that's without it. Also interesting to toggle on and off, but I'm going to try to maybe if I round this number, what does that end up doing, if anything? Okay, I think it's kind of sending it up and down without such a smooth, there we go. We can see the waveform it's making. If I trace this one out, it's becoming squared off shapes. If I do a tan just to see what that does, it creates some chaos, which also creates an interesting wavy-like form as these things go way high. That's kind of interesting, taming this thing down if I leave a background of that. Okay, now it's making little kind of cartoon-like ripples. Wow, which there's way too many when I started all over. It feels like this thing's kind of upside down. what are those things doing way out there? Something. Yeah, or if I gave something similar with a frame count modulo that it kind of got up and then spiked down. So let me do like a, turn that off for a sec and say frame count modulo 50. And then everything kind of flies up and disappears. And if I said equals, then it would be doing this all together. And what happens if, maybe I just want to use the point where it's supposed to be plus this amount. So maybe even disable that whole thing and say be where you are minus this. There we go. Now everyone is kind of staggered, which isn't so great. So they need some offsets to each other. Alright, if I just use I, get like a staggering times a small amount is even more staggered. I think I need to go to a larger number, like 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. 4 was not too shabby. Turn off the background to see what that thing is doing. It's raising up to the side. Swapping the X for what I had previously. Now it looks like it's sprouting out from the ground. No, I think I want to keep it doing its horizontal movement. One benefit of going to that other style is I can use lines. Not really. Because we're doing this. Triangles. Interesting. It's like I should just count every so many, and then I could probably avoid those vertices maybe. If I just want the triangles, which might be interesting for this kind of wave shape. Skipping every 2, every 3, every 4, every 5, every 6. Yeah, interesting and abstract. Totally not what I was going for, but interesting just to see what these other patterns end up creating. For every 3, nope, every 4. $80 of these things. All right, that's triangles. Back to points. Okay, but we're in 3D. So I'm going to quickly check out what would a voxel look like. We've been translated. I could easily draw little boxes where these things are and let the fan hate me. Draw 30 of them. Interesting to just see what what voxel like. These things should be way smaller. 5, 10, 15. And then what if they are translated again with those coordinates? And without this translation, there we go. And maybe this should be actually a fill instead of a stroke if it's a voxel. With no stroke. Leave a background. And have these things rotate a bit on their own axis. Probably can't even see them doing that. They need to be way bigger. Yep, I don't think this is looking too wavy-like. Maybe it's also because that's something I haven't done this whole time, is to move the fill or stroke down into this territory so that it only affects each one of these things, and then it should be an eye in there. So that they each could have different coloring. I guess it probably didn't matter before when it was vertices, because as a vertex form you don't get to control the coloring of each thing. So that's an interesting just like smashing of cubes with the background. Looks similar. It's probably nicer to have a little bit of perspective on it. Yeah, but this Y, they're all like running off and going to this Y, and that's from this minus amount of 50. If I get rid of that, they'll kind of sit still. So maybe I do get rid of that for a minute. Leave it as a comment in case I want it back. Maybe bring back, whoops. Let's bring back a previous experiment. Nope, those numbers had changed way too much. Okay, this was the like moving off to the side version. Okay, that was them going up, undo. They need to be way more spread out than they are, and why isn't that happening? I think I just have to start it over once. There we go. Okay, they slowly had collapsed on each other and had to restart it. Yeah, so this is already creating an interesting perspective, even though it's totally flat. And the Z is not changing permanently. It's just like being affected on the fly. So that could be an interesting spot to maybe start off with. Instead of this, I have random 0, 0. Okay, what if I install a sine wave there to give it some kind of texture? Like a sine frame count times 0.1 times 100. I don't know if that does a whole lot. Times 200 or 300. Not sure if I see that change happening. I don't see that change happening. What was that change? Did it do anything? Sine frame count. There is no frame count. That's why. J. Have to use J and I in there. There we go. Ooh. Creating like a Yep, now it's like a different kind of wave. So that is with J. If I used I instead, something else, J was potentially better. This should maybe be height divided by 2. I'm not sure. Creates a big bulge. That was 0.1. If I do 0.2, then it starts to make this kind of a rippling wave. Ooh, that's trippy. All right, let's bring this back to give those things some movement forward. There we go. So I'll start it over, and now those things have that depth, and they move in and out on us. And let's turn off the background for a bit and see what it's like if there's no trace. And this was going technically half the width forward and back. Here I said offset is this like tiny little number, but if I temporarily let them go way further forward and back, they're gonna freak out. Then I could slow them way down. And we could pretend that we're looking at this stuff underwater. This is what it looks like down there. We've gone to some sort of voxel representation of water. What if this was just like 50? Interesting. Another stream of waves. If I start it over altogether, this is like drawing out those lines. Or 10. They don't all need to be the same size either. Maybe I just do like I modulo 15. Whoops. Modulo, not times. 25. Some are allowed to be bigger than others. Yeah, this took quite a step away from the original waves. But wow, that makes a cool pattern. These things are now just kind of in a row. Almost creates like swimming lanes. If I twist it a bit and put the background back on, wrong button. We can see what this thing is looking like. Some kind of a wave. Maybe we put ourselves inside of it for a bit. Turn off the background so we can leave a trace out. Activate the background again while we find another position. But this is all based on this sine wave, and who knows what the right one is. Yep, that's not it, but it is interesting. Turn off the background and zoom through that. What if it was a really small number? Not true, then it just won't have much wave at all. So back to 0.1 was quite interesting. Whoops. Turning off the background. That also makes quite an interesting pattern. Nothing about the waves as intended. What if these rotates happen on a different axis, or a Z rather? And then these things would be twisting while they fly by. And maybe it should be nothing less than like 5 or 10 plus, so we don't have any really small ones. And it probably gets interesting once they start to fill the page. Getting a little bit of lag. I think there could be a few too many shapes being drawn. And maybe worth rotating on other axes at the same time at different speeds. And different offsets. But we lost the flat shading actually, which was quite cool. There we go. I guess with one axis of rotation is enough. All right, an hour has flown by. Messing around with waves. Quasi-inspired by nature of waves on the water of a lake. Didn't look like this. Maybe it did for some animals' perspective. Thanks for tuning in. See you next week, next Tuesday, 9 p.m. Central European.